Okay, so this is some problems involving factoring by grouping. So this is from the Unit 6 Test 2 practice test. It's question 11 or 12, depending on the test. But so what we're looking at here is we're trying to figure out a way to factor this down, right? So this isn't a quadratic. So we can't use our normal ways of factoring quadratics like magic X or, putting it into two pairs or whatever. So this is a little bit different. There's four terms here. And if we look at all four of these terms, there are no common factors. Okay, so I have W cubed here, but there are no W's down here, right, on the constant term. There's a 30 here, and so I've got the factors of 30 are 5 and 6 are two of them. And here we see a 5 in this one, here we see a 6 in this one, but there's no number here. So there's no common factor that I can take out of all of these. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use a trick. We're going to use a trick to see if we can like force this to factor. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of divide this into two pieces. Oops, let's try that again. We're going to divide this into two pieces. So we're going to basically going to cut this in half. Right? We're going to treat each one of these groups as a separate factoring thing. And what we hope to see is when we go through this, what we hope to see is when we factor it, that there'll be something in common between them. Okay. And instead of being a single like number or letter, what we'll see is that instead of a common single factor, we'll have a binomial factor, right? We'll have a factor that's like, W minus 5 or W plus 6 or something like that, right? So that's what we're trying to look for. But until we get to that point, we're just going to take a look at each one of these separately. So I'm going to look at W cubed minus 6W squared, and I'm going to factor that. So the first thing I always want to do when I factor is I want to see if there's a common factor here. And so I see that they both have W's, and the second one has a W squared. So there are two W's multiplied together in there. And so there's a W squared inside of here as well. And so that's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to factor out a W squared. Okay. Now, the question is, once I take out a W squared, what do I have left over? Well, if I take W to the third power, right, and I divide it by W squared, I'm left with W. Or another way to think about this is, what do I have to multiply W squared by to get W cubed? Well, I have to multiply W squared times W to get W cubed. Okay, so the idea is we're trying to rewrite this in a factored form. Now, look at the second part. I've got W squared here, and so if I factor out the W squared, I'm just left with minus 6. So I have W minus 6. Okay, so there's the first half of that. All right, now let's take a look at the second half of this. And so what I want to do is I want to see again if are there any common factors here. Okay, are there any common factors here? And so so what I'd like to do, what I'm hopefully going to see, right, is that I'm going to have some number here, and what I hopefully am going to see is I'm going to see another W minus 6 inside of here, right? That's what I want to see. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a negative 5. So negative 5 goes into this. Negative 5 also goes into 30, positive 30, right? So if I multiply negative 5 times negative 6, I get positive 30. So I'm going to factor this negative 5 out of here. This doesn't have a W, so I can't factor it out. And this has a negative 5, so I want to factor this negative 5 out of here. So what do I have to multiply? What do I have to multiply? Negative 5 times what gives me negative 5W? Well, it's W. And then negative 5 times what gives me positive 30? Well, the negative 5 times negative 6 gives me positive 30. Okay, so now we've factored both of those parts, right? We factored both of those groups. So we took this first group and factored it into this. We took the second group and we factored it into this. We notice that they have a common factor, right? They have a W minus 6. So this is something times W minus 6 and something else times W minus 6. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor out that w minus 6. So we're going to say, well, this is w minus 6 times what? Well, it's w minus 6 times w squared. And it's also w minus 6 times negative 5. And so that's how we would write out that answer. Now we can check that just by going through and using the distributed property or foiling, right, and multiply this back out. And when we multiply it back out, we should end up right where we started, right? So this whole process of factoring is just trying to unmultiply it, right, as best we can. And so we've unmultiplied it, and now we could multiply it back together as a means of checking that. And so if we do that, we multiply the first terms together, right? W times w squared gives me w cubed. If I multiply these two inside ones here, negative 6 times w squared gives me negative 6w squared. And if I multiply the first one and the last one here, I've got negative 5 times w, that's just negative 5w. And if I multiply the last ones here, negative 6 times negative 5, I get positive 30. And so I end up back where I started, okay? W cubed minus 6w squared minus 5w plus 30. This is our check step. This is just to check to see that these two things actually do multiply to give me this. Okay, so hopefully that helps. What we're looking for here is, again, just to break this into two pieces and then factor each piece, factor each group. And so we're going to factor each group, and what we're hoping to find, right, is a common factor, a common, they call it a binomial factor, right? It's this w minus 6, and this w minus 6 is a factor of both of those. So we factor that out, and we're left with w squared minus 5. Okay, hopefully this helps. If you're still struggling with it, please let me know.